So this video is just going to be a quick one on how to adjust the exposure on the camera. There's another video that goes through the menus on the cameras, but this one's going to be a little quicker and focus just on setting the exposure. So what I've done here is we're going to be taking a look at this in this camera. We're going to be using the NX cam on this example. Again, the 4K is absolutely identical, and the V1U is extremely similar. Just a couple of subtle differences that I'll try to remember to point out as we're going through this. So, if we take a look at the screen on the camera here, across the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few different markers. So there's one that says f4, one that says 9 dB, and one that says 30 here. And what those actually mean, the f4, let's see, I think I can do a picture-in-picture here. Yeah, there we go. So the f4 actually means that's the size of the iris, which basically controls the opening that allows the light to come in. So a smaller opening obviously lets less light in, a bigger opening lets more light in. And f4 is pretty large. The numbers are a little bit counterintuitive because the larger the number, the smaller the opening and the less light's being let in. So in this case, if we have an f4, that's letting in nearly as much light as this camera can do. And the camera can go down to 2.8, but only at a wide setting. F4, it works through the entire zoom range. And f4 allows a fair amount of light in, but the downside for that is that it has what we call a shallow depth of field, meaning two objects that are close together might not both be in focus. If we want to have both objects be in focus, then we want a larger depth of field, and the way to create that is actually by increasing that f number, which makes the aperture smaller, so it lets less light in, but it allows more to be in focus. On these cameras, the way we adjust the iris is through this small ring at the back, the farthest one back. So as I adjust this, you'll see that the f number is actually changing. And if you look at the image on the screen, it actually gets darker when that number gets smaller. Now, we have to set the iris on the cameras based on how much we need to be in focus. For most of the events that we do, an f4 number is okay. But for example, the other night when I was shooting a concert, an f4 had one of the singers in focus, but another singer behind them was out of focus. So I had to stop down to an f6.2 in order to make sure that both of those were actually sharply in focus. So we adjust that using the iris ring. Now, if you look at the side of the camera here, there is an iris button. Pressing that button actually turns on the automatic iris feature, or it sets it to manual. You can only make adjustments on the iris when it's set to manual. So if it's on automatic iris, I'll go ahead and press the button so you can see what happens. We get a little A next to the iris number. And that's telling us that number is automatic. If I press the button again, now it goes back to manual. When it's on manual, you can use the ring to adjust the iris. Otherwise, the camera makes the adjustment automatically. All right. So, the iris obviously controls how much light is left in, is allowed to enter the camera and be recorded. If the iris is small, then we need to compensate for that by adding what we call gain, or brightness, to the image. Now that's done by using the gain button that's on the camera here. So as I switch back to the camera display, we'll see that currently this 9 dB is highlighted. Darken this up just a little bit. There we go. Make that easier to read. So with that highlighted, that means that if we make any adjustments on the camera right now, what we will be adjusting is the gain. So that's done through this little lever on the left side. So if we want to reduce the gain, we move the lever down. And as I do that, you can see that the number is actually decreasing. And if we want to increase the gain, we move the lever up. The gain on this camera can actually go down to a -3. I'm not sure if you can read that. Yeah, so we can go down to a -3 on there. So basically what that's telling is it's actually removing a little bit of light coming through the sensor when it's doing the recording. Normally we will try and keep the gain between -3 and about 9. If we go much higher than 9, it starts to add a significant amount of noise to the image. So we try and keep the gain numbers below a +9. All right. So the next thing that affects the exposure is the shutter speed. So as we look back, go back and look at the camera here. If we want to adjust the shutter speed, what we want to do is we'll press the shutter button. That will highlight the shutter option, and then we can use this up-down control right here to adjust the shutter speed. For most of the events that we do, we'll probably actually stay with a shutter speed of approximately 30th of a second when we're shooting indoor. When we're shooting outdoor, we may go down to 1/250th, 1/125th, or maybe even faster if we happen to be shooting something with a lot of action, such as a sporting event, where we really want to be able to capture the motion without too much blurring going on. So the faster our shutter speed, the more it tends to freeze motion. And that number is expressed in fractions of a second. So if the display shows a 30, that means that the shutter speed is currently 1/30th of a second. So the way we control the brightness on the camera is through those parameters. We've got iris, we've got gain, and we've got shutter speed. The longer the shutter speed, the more light we let in. The larger the iris, and the smaller the number, the more light we let in. And then we use the gain after that to compensate for having too much or too little light entering the camera. So between those three settings, we'll be able to get the exposure that we need. If we're in a production and the director tells one of the camera operators that their image is too hot, usually the way we'll fix that is by dropping the gain. So press the gain button on the camera if it's not already highlighted, then use the little lever to drop the gain down. If we get to the point where the gain is already at -3, what we'll do there is actually close down the iris a little bit. So turn that ring, increase the number, and that will drop the amount of light that's coming through the camera's iris and darken the exposure. So the director will help to let us know when our exposure is too dark, too hot, and then from there we can make adjustments on the iris and the gain in order to give us the exposure that we need.